quick question for me to start off there. Erik, you mentioned that if there's litigation involved, you don't let people into the archives. Are there other times when you don't want to open up the archives for somebody?
It's part of our mission as a 501c3, as a nonprofit, is that we are open and free to everyone. Yeah. And so we make that very clear to our depositors. So essentially with litigation research, because when we make them stipulate, but also litigation researchers ask very different kinds of questions than historians, and we can see them coming a mile away, generally speaking. And so when that happens, we ask them flat out, are you doing this because you're interested in engaging in litigation? Then you actually need to go to the owners of the collection. And we make that restriction clear in our finding aids and so forth. But generally speaking, we haven't had a problem with the arrangement. Typically what happens, I get served with the subpoena. They want the entire collection at the nearby courthouse, usually in 3 days' time. And I turn to the collection owner, and they then have the option of whether they want to quash the subpoena. And if they don't, what we do is we negotiate, well, why don't you, the plaintiff, bring your team in and use the collection in the archive, in the reading room, rather than us boxing everything up and sending it out.
Vrunda, anytime you've said no to a request?
No, not really. We have found our ways in tweaking their request and sending that. But yes, means sometimes, they have the specific queries, but when they see the archives and the other collection, they will just keep on saying, okay, give me this, give me that. So at that time, we have to really tell them that, okay, let's stick to the query that you wanted. And if you want this again, for any different reasons, then you can come back. But we have to be like really, but there are some records which are already closed. So those definitely, especially the property-related records of the company, we strictly say no. As a policy, we have that. So that's.
And from the opposite side, have you been refused, Susanna?
Yes. But it's quite a long time ago. I think that's an unfortunate thing also to say, that it's easier to refuse a fairly young scholar than to refuse somebody with a chair. Yeah. But I have some colleagues that also now who has not gained access, but also they have been younger ones. So that's another thing that actually to be open, transparency is very important. Is that I am actually in a way also for one private archive in the scientific council. So we are the gatekeeper. I mean, we are, of course, it's the owners board who decides then, but we do the recommendation for who gets access. And there is, for example, the PhD is required before you get access. So, yep. So I see it from this side as well.
Limiting into scholars, yeah, pure scholars. Yeah. Questions? Jonas back there had one.
Thank you, sir. Myself, Dr. Meena Gautam. Thank you, Vrunda, for your very nice and illustrious presentation. Just supplementing something and a suggestion there too. Of course, I am Ahmedabad discontinued with that studies of business history as soon as Professor Dvijendra Tripathi retired. But happy to note that they are reintroducing because they were having short of faculty. One was the reason. Then for the information of my delegate colleagues here, in National Archives of India School of Archival Studies, I was instrumental in introducing a specialization paper in business archives. And I'm happy to inform that many of the business archives in the country are being headed by the trainees trained by us in the school in National Archives of India. But I have a suggestion to make. If SBA can take up a project mapping of business archives in different countries, because we do not know exactly in India how many business archives do exist. Like for December International Seminar, I do not know if, I'm not sure if all those will be made to participate in that international seminar, because we need to know them and make them aware. Yes, we are there and they can be very much part of our, this international SBA and ICA, a very prestigious thing. I think I feel honored to be part of this international conference, part of ICA. And like that, I think we can further spread this awareness and information regarding our business archives and the need for that. Thank you.
Very good suggestion, thank you. Any other questions? Henning back there, and then Ben.
Thank you. Susanna, you mentioned that companies are expected to preserve certain things. And my original question to you would be, so what should be preserved from the company side? However, I would like Erik to answer that question as well, in terms of, do you accept any collection, or do you require certain parts of a collection to be taken away before you accept it?
Obviously, it's a difficult question until you go there. I have sometimes given some advice to when somebody has asked, and then we have been like this. So it's a very, of course, practical question at occasionally. So I cannot really say that I could give a short answer to this, but obviously I would say that the more there is preserved, if you don't want to destroy anything, if you don't have a good motivation, then preserve it. Because I usually use this also. I mean, this has nothing to do now with that if there is something fishy or some scandals, but more like this, that I often use this sort of material which is mixed, which is not perhaps even organized, but I can have very much use for it, which is difficult for anybody else to see that there is any use for it. So in that way, I would say that if you don't really have a very good motivation why you would destroy this, then don't do it.
Erik?
First of all, we don't take every collection, and I hope I'm not offending anybody here. Nobody's perhaps employed by a pump manufacturer, but I've gone on the record saying that I don't want the records of 10 pump companies. What we do is we look for representative or unusual companies or trade. Oftentimes we get to a company through trade organizations. I can't tell you how many times where the fact that we hold the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's archive has opened doors for us immediately. When we took on the collection of or digitized some materials for the National Auto Dealers Association, there was some nervousness when we initially talked to them about this material being freely available through our digital archive website. And one of the officers in the room, one of their officers said, "Oh, I used to work for the chamber. No, Hagley, they're good. They're fine." And the doors suddenly just opened. We make it fairly clear to companies what kinds of records we're collecting. We're all, if not credentialed historians, we're closeted historians. And we keep up on the literature. It helps to have the BHC headquartered at Hagley, so we understand what scholars want. And that allows us to go through and say, yes, we'll take those records, we'll take the meeting minutes of the Executive Council, but we're not interested in motor pool and cancel checks. And that makes it, I think, a little bit easier. There was one depositor in which, without telling us that this was coming, sent us about 60 boxes in our direction and said, ta-da, and we looked through, and it was tax records and stuff that really, for our crowd, has no research value. And so we asked them to remove nearly a third of what they had sent because we deemed it to not be of research value. So that's part of our deposit agreement that we sign with our depositors, is that ultimately we're the arbiter of what counts as research value. If they have additional materials they want housed for their own purposes, we're happy to negotiate that.
Vrunda, any thoughts on what you want to keep in the archives and not?
Yeah, so basically, initially when we started setting up, we really didn't want to say no to anyone. So people were just sending us the boxes, but then we had this agreement that if we find anything ephemeral in that, then we will destroy it. So that kind of an agreement which we really discussed with the concerned departments. But there are certain things now we have listed that we really don't want, like the invoices for the products, because people, whenever they're cleaning their offices, they just send, like you said, 60 boxes, and then, so that's what actually they are doing. So we have to like really, have these discretionary decisions that we have to make every time. So that's the part of the whole process. But I would also like to add that we were once appraising one collection, which was actually the Bank of India collection, because our owners are on different board of directors of different companies and also the institutions. And we were really thinking that, if they are not really, there is no correspondence, if they are just reports that are being sent to them because they are board of director, whether we should keep it. So that was the Bank of India. And then suddenly we got a query from one historian who was chronicling the history of Bank of India. And he said that, your one of the Godreges was on the board, so do you have any records? And that time we realized that in absence of the other institutional archives, I think we should retain what we have so that, the resources are available till the time these institutions have their own archives. So, so some of these things we have to really see.
Consider, yeah.
There and just kind of point out, one of our collections is the Pennsylvania Railroad, which was the largest railroad in the United States before it went under. When we were showed the warehouse in which their records were kept, their record collection was 400,000 linear feet. So it's basically 130,000 linear meters. Hadley did not swallow it whole, obviously. And in fact, we got together with 7 other archives and made arrangements. We retained all 8 organizations, saved about 9,000 linear feet, or about 3,000 linear meters of that material. So from 400,000 to 8. Okay, and still people find that collection really valuable. I mean, we essentially, the rest of it went to the shredder.
One last question before we break. Ben.
I have a question for Susanna. You said I don't do corporate history or commissioned work. Is this a principle, or what is your view on commissioned history?
No, it's not at all a principle question of principle. I have just been lucky to get this sort of funding for work that, what shall we say, has gotten my career going in the academic world, which is of course, but I have the highest regard, and for example, I really enjoy work. I know very well those who have been writing on the Wallenberg family here in Sweden, and excellent works done also from this perspective. I mean, from a scholarly perspective, but it's more that I am driven very much by this sort of, I want to know more about the economic development from a more what is happening within the industries and in businesses and so on, and that I have been lucky to have money from that, but I feel that good commissioned and corporate histories are really valuable, and I use them a lot also as sources. So that's.
Thank you very much. And with that, thank you to our panel.